Peter and Josephine talk about having clinical depression in their story. Clinical depression is quite different from being depressed. You might be depressed because you've had a fight with your parents or a friend, and this might last for a few hours or a day. But for people with clinical depression, this normally lasts for more than 2 weeks. Some of the other symptoms of clinical depression is that people might have bouts of crying, a lack of motivation, a lack of energy, a lack of appetite, and they might have difficulty sleeping. And for people with clinical depression, they may actually feel helpless and hopeless. Some of the triggers for clinical depression might be the death of a loved one, and that might be the death of a parent or a grandparent. It might be unforeseen stress, such as school exams or unemployment or drought. And for other people like Peter, it might be bullying in schools. Peter and Josephine talk about having feelings of suicide and self-harm. For people with severe depression, they may feel this way. It's really important that if you feel like this or somebody you know feels like this, that you get some help. There is help for depression. You might be able to see a GP and they might be able to prescribe some medication. You might also see a counsellor and they might give you some generalist counselling, or you might combine the two. But it's really important for you to know that depression is not the fault of the person, that it is a real illness, and that you can get help.
As a child, my life was like a pendulum. On the one hand, I loved performance, being on stage, acting and modelling. But at home, I was private, isolated. I loved getting lost in stories, being in my room alone, imagining. When I was at high school, I wanted to fit in. I'd skip school to meet up with mates in parks, pinball parlours. We'd drink or take drugs, but mostly we'd sniff chrome paint. I started fighting with my parents. I stopped dancing and I stopped doing well at school. I started running away. I was 14 the first time I left home. I also started experimenting with other drugs. In the years that followed, I took almost everything. I was leading a double life. I don't think I ever once told the truth to my workmates about what I was doing on the weekend. My first psychotic experience was when I was on LSD. It was a phenomenon I still can't explain in its entirety. I would hallucinate, hear voices. It was like I had ESP. Everyone was talking to me at once, but nobody's lips were moving. When I'd slept the drugs off, things would go back to normal. I thought it was just a bad trip. It's what they later told me was a drug-induced psychosis. When the psychosis became a fully blown episode, it didn't stop. The voices were constant and the delusions wouldn't go away. I thought that everybody on the street knew me, and their thoughts would fill my mind as fast as I would look at them. Mostly, they'd tell me that I was a bad person. It was all extremely scary. One day, my behaviour was so bizarre that my parents called the youth access team and I was hospitalised. When I got back from the ward, I just felt empty. I felt empty for a good 2 years after I found out I had schizophrenia. I lost my job, and I withdrew from my friends. My parents had to take care of me for months. Schizophrenia makes your brain your worst enemy. It's a constant headspin. You can't trust your own thoughts, and all you want to do is stop thinking, but all you can do is think. It took me a long time to work out what was me and what was the mental illness. Medication has helped. I used to live to take pills, and now I have to take pills to live, and I'm okay with that. I have different problems to most people. Some days are harder than others. I do still hear voices, but I know I have to disregard what they say. I've learnt to make my peace with my mental illness. I'm not just a schizophrenic. I'm certainly much more than that.
For some people, using certain types of drugs can trigger a psychotic episode. We refer to this as drug-induced psychosis. They may experience hallucinations, paranoia, and delusions. Similar to what Rachel talks about in her story when she describes her first psychotic episode happening when she was using LSD, and this made her have hallucinations and hear voices. For most people, a drug-induced psychosis may only last for a few days, but for others who may have a predisposition to a psychotic illness such as schizophrenia, the effects of the drugs may last for a longer time and cause them to have longer-term mental health issues, such as in Rachel's story. The type of drugs that may cause drug-induced psychosis are things such as speed, ice, acid, ecstasy, and even cannabis. For people who already have pre-existing mental health issues, using these types of drugs can make the illness worse or could make treatments far less effective.